Right. Oh, there he is.
And gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. We are in, at this moment, an amazing cafe in Essaouira. Ali is sitting in an amazing cafe in Marrakesh, the World Storytelling Cafe. And we are on the final day of the Marrakesh International Storytelling Festival. And we want to thank the volunteers, the storytellers, the Riad owners, lots of incredibly powerful people, and most of all, the storytellers and the audience.
I'm guessing like an alien race that basically feeds off the evil energy within them.
Okay.
Yeah, that way. And so someone was like, "I'll protect you, mommy," even though it's an antagonist. So she wrote, "I worked so hard to rid myself of my worm. I don't need a new one."
I trust you can take it away.
Right, well, John, if you can hear my words, you'll all look as if you're having a really good time. I was really disappointed not to be able to be there. So and I'm going to try and get there if I can. It's in the diary for next year. And Mike Woods has been kind enough to ask me to come for 2023. It was all sorts of reasons this end that I couldn't go. So that was the only reason. Right. So we're back to normality. It looks like I can't see anybody sitting on a decking overlooking a desert with blue skies, having a great big party in the middle of it in Marrakesh. So I think we're going to just have to bring our feet down to the ground and just start telling a few stories amongst ourselves. So I'm going to just turn around now to David, and then David Thompson, he's going to tell us a story, and Jackie's going to help. Is that right, Jackie?
Yep.
Right, so if we all mute ourselves.
Hello, everybody. My story. Everybody. My story is magical.
Hello, everybody, and my story is for everybody, and it's magical.
Long ago, imagine they were a king of golden story.
Long, long, long ago in Marrakesh, there was a king who couldn't tell stories.
All the day were a boy good dog. Oh, good day story.
And there was also a boy called John who couldn't tell stories. Have you lost it, David?
But there are the lot of the story today.
But they had lots of beautiful stories to tell.
Would they can do? How do they my brother doing it around the room?
One day, the king wondered How do I share my beautiful stories all around the world?
Kilo apple. Oh, kid. How are they now doing?
The king went out for a walk, and he looked for young John and asked him, "Do you know how I could share my stories with the world?"
I not know. Que de que lo que va it other
"I don't know," said young John. So the king walked back inside, and he had an idea. Woo!
Why not what thou doing?
I know what I'll do. I'll write down my stories.
Though that is it.
So that is what he did.
It do a word with a bird the road but away.
He threw them out the window and they fluttered to the ground. Some landed on the water and floated away.
That were the with them. La doing with them.
John Rowe found some and read them. Lots and lots of storytellers read the tales.
Magic didn't love it at magic. Bobby Ducky David.
Mary and Sarah and Norman and Baba C and David shared the tales around the world.
Ducky were added the added every other but they were did do that.
The king was very happy, and even young John went round the world telling stories. Thank you.
David, that was lovely. Thank you very much, mate.
Okay.
You know, you're always welcome to come here with Jackie as well. And Jackie, thank you very much for bothering to come and help. We do really, really
because I think they're going to start checking hair, and that lasts longer.
On the half-life, whatever they take.
Right. Good evening, Mike.
Yeah, but most things will be clear of urine in a week.
Yeah, good evening, Mike.
I saw that thing on about how.
Hi, sorry, I didn't realise my microphone was on. I'll turn it off.
Right. I'm sure we'll see Mike's face in all its. There he is. Right. So the batting order is going to be Kath, then Despinia, and then we'll take it from there and see what's happening. Okay. So I might. Yeah. Right. So Kath, where you gone? Oh, there you are. Are you in your cupboard? Are you in your cupboard?
I'm in my cupboard. Yeah, I'm in my cupboard again. You know I live in my cupboard, Mike. You do know.
You have to explain to everybody what your cupboard is.
Well, for the Get a Word in Edgeways festival, we've been having monthly concerts, and I've been doing little snippets of folklore and folk songs and traditions. And it's called Kath's Cupboard of Customs, but unfortunately it has entailed me living in a cupboard for the last 18 months. Occasionally they slide food under the door, but obviously it has to be flat. You know, they make me a sandwich, then they roll it flat, slide it under the door. It's all I get. That's true, isn't it, Mike? Every word of that was true.
Absolutely. And I don't know what they do with that lemon drizzle cake, but it's made your hair go all blonde.
Well, you see, lemon drizzle cake, you just form it into crumbs, squash it under the door. Anyway, shall I get on with the story?
I don't know what Paul's been doing.
I thought, as this is, thank you very much, Diana. As this is a World Cafe, I consider it incumbent on me to tell a very English story. And this is a story about a grammar school. And even though the story takes place 150 years ago, even then the grammar school was old. It was built of red brick, and in the afternoon sun it glowed like a rose. The lintels over the doors and the windows, they'd faded, the stone lintels had faded to an antique gold colour. All around the school buildings and leading out to the dormitories and the playing field, there were paved pathways, and that stone paving, it had just sagged a little in the middle where over hundreds of years thousands of boys' feet had walked those ways. The schoolmasters, because it was an all-male establishment apart from cook and matron and the school cat, the schoolmasters dressed very traditionally. They wore their mortarboards, they had their academic gowns, and each master had a silk sash that showed which university he'd been to and what his subject was. The boys wore long jackets and wing collars and dark trousers. The school cat was a tortoiseshell. There were 4 boys, Sandy and Martin and Figgis and Tom, and 4 years before this story starts, they had all started the school at the same time. They shared a little dormitory together. Well, Sandy and Martin and Figgis and Tom, they tolerated school well enough. They liked most of the subjects well enough, but oh my goodness. Friday afternoons. On Friday afternoons it was Latin. The Latin master, they called him Old Ely. They didn't call him that to his face. His real name was Mr. Elysian. Old Ely, he was the Latin master. And Latin on a Friday afternoon, and to add insult to injury, it was double Latin. And can you blame the boys for going off into a dream? Can you blame them for looking out of the window on a sunny afternoon and thinking of other things? Well, one thing they did have to think about on a Friday afternoon was Saturday afternoons. Because on a Saturday afternoon, if you'd been a good lad all week and if you'd done all your prep, you were allowed a free pass into the town. And this is what the 4 friends looked forward to every week. And this particular Saturday, they carried out their usual Saturday afternoon ritual. They walked along the school drive until they got to the school gate, and then they all stood, the 4 of them, Sandy and Martin and Figgis and Tom, shoulder to shoulder, and then they took a deep breath and they each stepped over the threshold into the outside world, into freedom together. Well, they had a special plan this particular afternoon. Of course, they were going to go down to the town, to the tea shop, and they were going to have tea and buns because they were, after all, 14-year-old boys. But they thought they'd explore the town a little further. And the plan was take first left, then first right, and then second left and second right, and so on. So they could find pastures new and yet find their way back. Well, this is what they did. And as they followed, first left, first right, second left, the streets became quieter and poorer and narrower until in the end they found themselves in an alley between tall buildings that was so narrow that they had to go in single file. And they walked along the alleyway, and then it opened out into a courtyard, and the courtyard was surrounded by tall buildings, so no sunlight came down to the cracked paving where weeds grew tall and pale, trying to reach the light. And on the far side of the courtyard, there was a little crouching shop, and above the door it said bookshop. Well, of course they had to go in, didn't they? And the four of them, Sandy and Martin, Figgis and Tom, they went into the bookshop, and the door swung closed behind them. Well, there wasn't much room. It was a small enough shop anyway, but there was a large desk with a man sitting behind it. There were piles of books and rolls of parchment and quill pens and an inkwell on the desk, and the man just looked at them. Well, the boys shuffled uncomfortably, and then Martin reached up and he just took a book from a shelf at random, and they all clustered round trying to look interested while the man watched them. And in fact, it was the most interesting book, because even though the light was dim inside the shop, the pale light, such as it was filtered through dirty windows. Every other page in this book was an illustration, and the illustrations were riveting. There were exotically dressed, passionate dancers. There were castles that could never have existed. There were landscapes that were wild and inviting of adventure. And on one page, there was a picture of a man-like creature, but it had curling horns coming from its head, and its skin was red. And opposite each of the illustrations, there was a page of text that the boys couldn't read, but looked like Latin. Well, of course, they had to have it. And they asked the man how much it was, and he said 2 shillings 4 halfpenny. Well, they all rummaged in their pockets, and they started to pull their loose change. There was a shilling, 1 and 4p, 1 and 9p, 1 and 11p, 2 shillings, 2 and 3p, 2 and 4p. And that seemed to be all they had. Well, the man was already wrapping the book in brown paper and tying string around it. But they didn't have enough money. Until Tom had an idea, and he put his finger and thumb into his pocket where he knew there was a hole in the bottom of the pocket, and he made the hole a bit bigger, and then he fished around in the lining of his jacket, and there it was, the final halfpenny. So they could pay the man, and he was just dripping sealing wax heated with a candle onto the knot of the string of that parcel. Well, Tom picked it up and clutched it, and all 4 of them hurried out of the shop, and they hurried back to the school as quickly as they could. They wanted to see what was in this book. Of course, Saturday afternoon, the safest place to go and be undisturbed is a classroom. So they went to their classroom and they opened the book, and it fell open on that page with the man-like creature with the horns and the red skin. And in unison, without anyone planning it or agreeing it, but in unison they all began to read the text on the opposite page. And as they read, the door creaked open slightly, and the school cat walked in. And as she heard their words, she arched her back. And they reached the bottom of the page. For a moment, nothing happened. And the air shimmered, and there was no clap of thunder. There was no flash of lightning. Just one moment there was empty space, and then there it was, towering above them, that creature that they'd seen in the book, red of skin with a horned head. And it moved its head from side to side, looking around the classroom, and then its gaze fell on the 4 boys. They hurried and stood with the teacher's desk between them and the creature, and it said, "What would you have me do?" And Sandy found his voice first. He said, "We don't want you to do anything." And the creature said, "But you have summoned me. You must give me a task." And Figgis said, "We haven't got any tasks." And the creature said, "Well, then I will make a task for myself, and I will begin by destroying you." And he picked up the teacher's desks in his two vast hands, and he flung it against the wall where it shattered. And then he looked from one boy to another, as if deciding who was to be first. Well, the cat flattened her ears and she shot out of the classroom with her tail like a bottle brush. And the boys tried to get closer together, as if that would help. And the creature was just raising one of its huge hands. It had decided on Tom. When the cat came racing back into the classroom, the door flung open and there was old Ely, his hair wild, his gown flying, and he pointed a finger at the creature and he spat out a stream of words that the boys didn't recognise, but they knew it was Latin. And the creature screamed and shrieked and writhed and was gone. With no clap of thunder, no streak of lightning, it was just gone. Well, the teacher's desk was sent down to the woodwork department where, after some time, it was mended. The four boys, of course, were not allowed any more privileges in town for the rest of the term. They continued to go to their Friday afternoon Latin lessons, but at least they now understood that it could have a purpose. But one question they could never answer was, who exactly was old Ely?
Well, Kath, like a good red wine, the older you are, the better it gets. Eh?
Oh, thanks, Mike. Thank you, Mike Flaherty, as well.
No, that's a lovely story and well told. And to be fair, in the World Storytelling Cafe after the Marrakesh and all that, that is a seriously English story.
Well, that's what I thought. I thought we could maybe
that
do
is a
some
serious
Englishness.
English story. Yeah. Right, so we said Despinia next, and I'm going to go after that myself, and then we're going to have Keith, and then we're going to see where we are. So we might be finishing. Ali we might be finishing a bit early tonight. Ali, you've probably had enough of storytellers. Right, so Despinia, over to you.
Okay. Fab story, Kath. So every time I hear a story twice, it's so much better for me because I can recall more stuff. Yeah, I love that.
Did I tell that one at the story round? I know I've told it in a few places lately.
Yeah, it was at the story round.
Right.
Yeah, and I loved it from the first time I heard it. Excellent. So now, well, that was indeed a lovely folk tale. I cannot compete with that, so I'm going to share something personal instead. I think I have to share with you tonight what seems to have been a life-changing experience for me. So it had me thinking, I think it might have the same effect on you. You see, one day I was walking in the countryside. I had this little lamb by my side. It was my favorite. It always followed me around. And we were walking down the road, which, weirdly enough, it was empty. Nobody else was there. We were just walking down the road, minding our own business. And at the side of the street, my eye caught 3 weird-looking figures who seemed to be whispering and murmuring among themselves, but I'm not the gossip type of girl, so I paid no attention to them and just kept on my way. But after a while, as I was walking along the bank of the river, my lamb, Zoe, at my side, one of them actually followed me, came towards me, and came right next to me and addressed me, said, "Hello." "Hi," said I. He said, "That's a fine-looking lamb you've got with you." "Well, thank you," I said. He says, "Well, it's so nice, actually, that I want it. I want you to give it to me." I said, "Is this a joke? Look, I'm not going to give you my lamb." "Yes, you are," said he, "for I am Headache. And if you don't give me your lamb, you will suffer." "Headache," I said. "Well, we're here to answer you, please. You cannot have my lamb." And I left him behind and carried on my way. I thought I would be left alone, but somehow that fellow, he just sneaked into my brain, and I could hear like screams and like nails clawing on iron. And it was horrible. I held my ears fast. I could not believe the agony. So what could I do? I saw the river at my side, so I quickly ran towards it and bent down at the bank and put my head in the ice cold water. And it was freezing cold. And after a little while, the top of my head was numb. I could feel nothing. So I just took my head out of the water and shook my head so that I could dry my hair, and it was gone. Well, that was good, I thought. And I went on my way. My lamb Zoe at my side. A few meters down the road, the second figure came towards me. And she said, "Hello there." "Hi," said I. "That's a nice lamb," she said. "Well, yeah, okay, listen, I just told your friend that you cannot have my lamb, okay? It's my lamb, I'm not giving it." "Yes, you are," said she, "for I am Bellyache, and if you do not hunt me your lamb, you will suffer. Look, just go away, bugger off, let me be. I'm not giving you my lamb, okay?" And I carried on walking, and then out of the blue, I held my belly fast, and I was in agony, really. And well, I'm really sorry to have to go public with it, but we're all human, right? Well, there was this bush at the side, and well, you know what people do. I don't know if it's happened to you. I went behind the bush, and soon, a little while later, I felt much better. The river helped as well. So I have had enough with these fellows, right? I took my lamb Zoe and continued on my way. And then the third figure approached me. Now I couldn't believe it. These bullies would not leave me alone. "Hello," said he, and he was a black-clad hoodie figure. I could see no face, only 2 red eyes underneath the hood that were like burning coal. "What is it now?" I said. "You can't have my lamb." "Yes, I can," said he, "for I am death, and if you love your life, you will hand me that lamb or you will lose it." Now, that had me blinking, because as much as I loved my lamb, well, I loved my life better. I did not want to lose it, so I conceded. I said, "Okay, all right, you can have my lamb. Go ahead, take her." "Me," said he, "take her, or you're carrying it for me." Well, what could I do? That was death, right? Death. So I grabbed Zoe, put her on my shoulders, and started walking after Death. On and on he went, and I followed. And we went up this road where this hill was, and we started going up. And then we reached this cave. I couldn't see it from afar. It was small, dark, and gloomy. Death entered, so I followed. And in it, although my eyes weren't very accustomed to the semi-light yet, I could see that there was a spiral staircase going downwards. On Death went, and I followed behind, Zoe on my shoulders, until the light of the day was totally gone behind us. I could see nothing. I had to feel my way, touch the wall on the side, and try the next footstep because I actually stepped on it. So on and on we went, downwards, and then in the distance I saw some flickering lights. And as we approached, I saw this large underground opening that was full of little oil lamps all around. There were zillions of them. I lost count. I asked, "What is this place?" Death said, "This is where all your lifespan remains until the end of your days." "Oh," said I, "and what are the oil lamps?" He said, "Each one of you is entitled to one." "Oh," I said, "well, where is mine?" "Come with me," he said. And I followed. He took me to this little cove where there was a bunch of oil lamps around. And he said, these are the oil lamps of your family." I had a closer look, and I could see that one of them had very little oil left in it, and the wick was getting smaller. And I asked him, "Whose is this?" And he said, "Well, that is your brother's." "Oh, and which one is mine?" I asked. "The one next to it," said he, pointing a bony figure at it. Well, mine had a good feel, so I said to Death, "Do you think you could just flip a little bit of my oil into my brother's oil lamp so he can have a little more life?" "No," said he, "for each person has their own share, and nobody can make it bigger or smaller. The amount is set." "Oh," said I, "well, okay then. Come along, Zoe," I said to my lamb, and I took her, started walking towards the staircase. "Where are you going?" said Death. "I'll be on my way," I said. "No, you're not," said he. "You will hunt me that lamb, or you will die." "No," said I won't." And I guess we went back to our normal lives. And we had a good life. Well, Zoe not so much, because, life cycle, once she was fed enough, she had to be feeding others, I guess, but I still have my life, which made me thinking, if this is the only life I get, I must make sure I make it to Marrakesh next year, just in case. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Despina. That was lovely. Thank you very much. Now, I don't think I've told this one here, but I'm going to have a check that I haven't. Because Sir Jasper, he came back from the Crusades and he stood up in Somerset and he said these immortal words: "How do you convert someone to your religion? By killing them." And he put his hands up like this. Now, this was 700-800 years ago when he said these words, and I don't think some days when I look around, things have changed very much. How do you convert someone to your religion? By killing them. He gave all his lands away, did Sir Jasper, to his oldest son. And he had his youngest son was a fellow called Hugh. And he said, you're coming with me. His wife had died and he went to a monastery in Grenoble in France. And there he spent the rest of his days. But Hugh, who was only 12 in those days, he liked the life and he stayed there. And he grew up in a monastery in his formative teenage years. Now, the king of our country in them days was a Henry. He was the second Henry, so they called him Henry II. And one day he was going down through Somerset and there was a monastery there and the whole place had gone to rack and ruin. All the monks were sleeping with the nuns and the nuns were sleeping with the monks, and they weren't going around the villages helping all the people, and they'd forgot to go to church. They only went once on Sundays. The whole place was just falling down. And he got really cross and he went stumping around the place and he said, what we need is a new abbot. So he sacked the abbot and he got his people around and said, who can we promote? And they started going through the list like you would. And they came across Sir Jasper. They said, well, what about him? He's, you know, they said, no, he's too old. And someone said, what about Hugh, his son? And the king said, who's he? So they told him who his son was and where he'd been. And now he was about 19 or 20. So the king said to Hugh, about Hugh, he said, go and get him and bring him back to Glastonbury. He can be the abbot. And the knights went. Well, they went all the way to Grenoble and they found this young monk. And he was sat in his cell and he was doing all the things that monks ought to do. And they said, well, the king has decided you're going to be the abbot of Glastonbury. And he went, I don't want to do that. He said, I'm quite happy here. I've got some bread and I've got some water and I've got my Bible. I'm not going to do that. Well, the knights, because the king was a Plantagenet, had a bit of a fierce temper and he didn't like things going wrong. So they were a bit scared. So they went down and said, well, we've got to persuade him to come. But the next morning, Hugh was up at 6 o'clock in the morning. He said, right, come on, let's go to Glastonbury. And they were so relieved. And they said, you're going to work for the king? And they went, no, but the Lord came into my heart last night. The light of Christianity came down into me. And a voice came to my mind and it said, it's not the king asking you to do this, it's I. And it's me who wants you to go. Well, Hugh was going to walk for our Lord and that was easy. So he went to Glastonbury. Took him about 24 hours. All the nuns were sleeping where the nuns were supposed to sleep. All the monks were sleeping where the monks were going to sleep. They all went to church 5 times a day. And when they weren't doing that, they're out in their community, being a hospital and helping all the old people, doing all the things monks and nuns ought to do. So the king came back and he looked round and everything was going tickety-boo and he was thinking, now, this is wonderful. Just what I needed to happen. And he went to Hugh and he said, you're doing me a really good job. Well, Hugh looked at him and he said, I'm not working for you. I'm working for our Lord. And he turned round and gave the King of England one of the biggest sermons you've ever seen in your life. It was a hell and damnation sermon. He called in all the archangels and he shouted and he ranted and what did you have to eat and who was in your bed last night? Da 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 da. And the king stood there going red in the face and said, if you don't stop, I'm going to send you to the Houses of Parliament, to the Tower of London, and I'm going to put you there for a month on bread and water. And Hugh looked at him and said, great, a holiday. And the king went, pardon? He said, I'd love to go and do that. I didn't want to be here in the first place. And the king went, huh. Well, you can stay here and be the abbot. And got on his horse and rode off. Well, you could hear the chuckling behind with all these knights and everything else. They thought that was really funny. And he turned around and said, that cell in the Tower of London is still vacant. You know, I'd be quiet. So he all went quiet. So he went back to London and he walked round his throne one way and he walked round his throne the other way. He kicked the cat and he kicked the dog and he shouted at his wife and did all the other things that kings in England did in them days. Suddenly he went, got it. And said, I've got to go to Cornwall. So he jumped on his horse and off he went to Cornwall. On the way, he stopped at Glastonbury. And he walked in there. And in them days, badges of office with a great big seal were about that big. And he said, right, he said, I'm promoting you. You're going to have to be the Bishop of Lincoln. And Hugh said, I don't want to be the Bishop of Lincoln. And the king said, I know. I know pretty much that's what you're going to say. But you say you're not serving the Lord, me, you're only serving the Lord. But it's going to be me who tells you where you're going to serve the Lord. You're the Bishop of Lincoln. Go up there. And Hugh's face went out and his chin came up, but he knew he'd been beaten and he knew he had to go. So he took the old road up to Lincoln and he went in there, and it was in the winter. And Keith, it was across in the Lincoln and the fens and everything else, and there was ice across the fens. It was January. And those winds, when they come from the east, they come from Russia, and there's no hills in between. The winds from the Urals that come across, and they come straight onto the Lincolnshire shores, and it could be the coldest place anywhere in the UK. It was freezing cold, and the crops hadn't done very well. As he walked in, the sun was just going down, and all he could hear was the children crying. And he stopped and he said, "Why are all the children crying in the city of Lincoln?" So they told him about how cold it was and how there was no food and there was a famine, and they didn't think they'd see the winter out. And the sheriff of Lincoln came down and he said to Hugh, "We've prepared the feast." And Hugh said, "What feast?" And he said, "If you're the Bishop of Lincoln, when he's consecrated, he always has a feast. All the posh people are up in the Bishop's Palace, and we've been hunting, and we've got loads of food, and the feast is ready." And Hugh said, "I'm not going up there. Bring all the food down here. I'm going to sit in the square." And the people of the town came out, and they all looked round, and there was Hugh, and he had a table in front of him, and he had a glass of water, and he had a piece of bread, and he folded his arms. When all the food was put out in front of him, he turned round to a little boy and said, "You little boy, come here." And the little boy came over and said, "Would you care to have some food with I?" The little boy said he would. So he took a piece of meat and he took his little knife out and he started cutting the piece of meat into two. And Hugh said, "Why are you cutting it into two for?" And he said, "Well, half is for me and half is for my little sister." And Hugh said, "Go and get your little sister." And he came up to the little sister and he said, "Would you care to eat at the bishop's feast?" And the little girl, she went and got some food. And Hugh looked at the sheriff, and the sheriff looked at Hugh, and a friendship was made in that instant. And the sheriff went out into the royal forests, and he hunted across all the royal forests, and he killed all the deer and the venison and all the other things, and he brought it all in there. And the townsfolk came in, and the rich people came down, and for 3 days, there was the sheriff kept bringing, he cleared all the forest, he kept bringing all the meat into the town, and after 3 days, everybody had eaten well, and there was enough food in the centre of Lincoln to keep the people going through to the spring. But as the sun had gone down that night, Hugh himself had just picked up a piece of bread, and he broke it in half, and the sheriff came over and said, "What are you doing, Hugh?" And he went, "This would be all I need today, and a glass of water." And the sheriff went over and got the very finest of the wines and came back and said, "You can eat the bread, but you'll drink what I give you. And that's the finest of the wines. It's the king's wines. It's the king's port." And then the people of Lincoln knew what kind of bishop they had. And he walked in to his church for the first time, the great big cathedral that had only just been finished, on the middle of the only hill in the whole of Lincolnshire, and there was an imp flying around. And he turned round and he said, "You are an impetuous imp." And he turned it into stone, and that imp is still there to this day. I've never seen it myself, but Keith is nodding, thank God. And I'm going to promise myself one day I will go and see it. Anyway, a couple of months later, the king turned, and he's looking round, and there's Hugh the bishop, and he's doing the things bishops do. And he says, I said, "Isn't it nice? Being a king and getting things right. What I like to do is to pick round holes in round pins and square pegs in square holes. Getting the right people in the right place. That's what makes my kingdom so good. Think I'll go hunting." And the sheriff turned around and go hunting if you like, but you won't catch anything. And the king said, "Why not? We've got the best hunting here and everywhere." So the whole royal forest are teeming with stuff. And said, "Well, they were before you turned up. I wiped a lot out to feed everybody. We had a famine here." And they told the king what happened. And as he was telling the king, the king's face was redder and redder and redder, and he was getting crosser and crosser and crosser. And Hugh walked in and gave him the biggest blast of damnation service you've ever seen in your life. You are a secular king and I'm a bishop, and whose bed was you in last night? And you're supposed to be a king of faith. And they read bits of the Bible at him and everything else. And the king went redder and redder and just stomped off. And he turned around and said, what should I do with you? Meet me in the forest at 10 o'clock in the morning. So Hugh turned up at 10 o'clock in the morning. As he walked through the forest, all the little animals kept following him. All the little rabbits and the stoats and the weasels, and particularly the geese and particularly the birds of the forest, because they knew that their friend the bishop was in trouble and they'd come to see what would happen. So all the trees filled up with the animals. And the king was sat on a stump. And either side there were 20 knights, and the king had and made a corridor, and he had to walk down the middle of the corridor. And as they came to the knights had to turn their backs on him like this. And he just walked straight up. And the king was sat there and he had a leather glove on. And he was just pulling the finger of the leather like that, as you do sometimes wearing leather gloves in the winter. And Hugh looked down and said, what you need, Henry, is a proper tanner to make you better gloves. Now, for those of you who don't know, one of the ancestors of William of Normandy, William our Conqueror, and that's one of his ancestors had married a tanner's daughter. He'd been riding through Normandy, he'd fallen in love, he'd married her, and to call those Plantagenets, that bunch, anything to do with tanning was the biggest insult you could do. And Hugh had just done it. And the king jumped up, and he was a great big man, and he put his hands up and he said, what am I supposed to do with you? Here you are. And he threw something at Hugh, and it hit him straight on the chest and it landed on the ground. And he said, don't be late, Privy Councillor. I hate people being late in my meetings. And Hugh picked up the seal and he went, you've made me a Privy Councillor. And he said, yes, he says, because what I need in my kingdom are people that tell me what they think, not what people who tell me what they think I want to hear. And you will always tell me what you think. I trust you with like that. Don't be late. As I said, I hate people being late at meetings. And off he stumped. Well, Hugh didn't want to be a Privy Councillor, but he knew that he was going to have to do it. And we can say quite happily that over the next few years, they were never friends and the relationship was tempestuous. Quite often they shouted at each other. Quite often the king threatened to send Hugh to the Tower of London, and quite often Hugh walked into his bedchamber to find out who he was sleeping with and gave him the biggest sermons in the churches all over. But I just think sometimes they quite liked each other. Anyway, with King came, and the king's time came and he died. And his son, the king is dead, long live the king. And he was Richard. He was the one we called the Lionheart. He was the one that went and fought Saladin, and everybody, he was never here for very long. And when it came to his, when they put the crown on his head, the enthronement and everything else, they had a great big meal. And Richard, the first time he'd sat at a great big feast, and he was sat on his throne and he was wearing his crown and everything else, he looked around and there was a gap where the bishops should be. And Hugh wasn't there. And he said, stop, before we eat, where is the Bishop of Lincoln? And they went and found him. And they brought him in and they made him stand in front of Richard. And Richard said, why are you late? He said, I'm the same as my father. I hate people being late, things that they should be late. He said, well, I was just coming back and there was a dead man under a hedge and he didn't have any money, so he needed a funeral. And I'm a religious person, so I took that person and buried him. And that's what I was doing this evening. And the king looked at him and went, so a pauper, someone who died under a hedge, was more important than your king. And Hugh looked at him straight in the eye and said, a life is a life. Everybody should have the Christian burial of everybody. Nobody should not have that. And yes, I took the time to do that. You've got many bishops. I was doing something else for someone. And like I said, that family all the same, they went red in the face. And Richard jumped up and he put his hands up in the air and he said, I've heard about you. My dad left a letter all about you. and he picked up the seal and he threw it straight at Hugh again. Yeah, Privy Council. And Hugh said, I don't know, don't give me all that. Dad said you'd say that. You're on the Privy Council, shut up. So he was a Privy Councillor 2 those times again. So when Richard died, John became king. Well, Hugh didn't like John at all. In fact, they never liked each other. He refused to be the Privy Councillor because he didn't think John would do anything about it. But in the end, he had to sort of be there as a ceremonial character. And he just thought John was a wimp. But it was in those days that Hugh himself died. And the people of Lincoln went to the king, and the king couldn't refuse, and he went to the Pope, and they came back and they said, yes, we're going to make you a saint. Saint Hugh of Lincoln. And he was called this, and this is why I like this character so much, because his official name is Saint Hugh, the Bishop of Lincoln, the defier of kings. And what a name to be given. What a name to have. And the defender of the children of the forest, they call, which they meant in those days, the animals of the forest and everything like that. And it's a lovely story, and I like him and everything else. But there's couple of other stories that come up as we talk about Hugh. Because there was that bloke I liked in that story, he's the sheriff of Lincoln. Now, he didn't have to do what he did, but he knew it was the right thing to do. And off he went, and he made sure that his community was fine. And just 60 miles to the south of there was another sheriff, and he was the one at Nottingham. And there was another bunch of people knocking around there. And there was a fire that every tuck shop in England was named after. And there was Ted from Priorslee, and there was Alan the Dale. The Dales in those days were the Yorkshire Dales, and he used to sing and play music. And there was Will Scarlett, and I wonder if Will Scarlett nowadays was what someone would call gay, or he just liked colourful clothes or whatever. There was Much, he was a miller's. And there was, of course, there was a fellow called Little John. Little John was a great big man. They called him Little John. He was 6 foot, and he was strong, and he was bored. And there was a lady called Mary. And of course, there was old Robin himself. The guy who went into our folklore in England because he robbed from the rich and he gave to the poor. And he was the one who was the saviour of all those people. But I just wonder sometimes, because he used to disappear when he really tweaked the nose of the sheriff of Nottingham too much, and the sheriff was really, really cross and really, really angry with him, whether he knew somewhere else that he could go and shelter, that he could sit in the pubs and the people would leave him be, and he could absolutely rest until it was time. A bolt hole underneath a good sheriff, a sheriff that was doing the things that they should have done in Lincoln, and a bishop that they called the defier of the kings. Right, a proper story. Well, that was one I was going to tell in Marrakesh. Okay. If I got there, I had it worked up, and I haven't told it for a while, but I will be telling it in Whitby this year, and hopefully Kathy will be there as well. Right, Keith, I think, as we've been talking about Lincolnshire so much, I think I love the snowdrops, mate. We have snowdrops here. Do you have snowdrops like that, Dispinia, where you are? The flowers of the snowdrops in the forest behind you.
No, spring is here now.
Spring is here.
Yeah, already.
I'm coming to live with you. We've got storm after storm after storm coming our way. Right, so I have a Donna and I have a Mike. If either of you want to tell stories, you need to tell me. And Susan, I rather hope, thinking you're going to probably not again. I know you're in South Africa. Anyway, Keith, over to you, mate.
Well, thank you. Thanks for the story about the Bishop of Lincoln, Hugh. And that stone sort of cast of the demon is still there. The imp of Lincoln is still there in the cathedral. It's a magnificent building that overlooks the whole city of Lincoln, as you say, on the top of a hill. And as you also mentioned, it's been blowing a gale all over the country in the UK. Also, it's been blowing a lot in Lincolnshire. And in the amongst the snowdrops, I've been able to pick up lots and lots of sticks. So we've got some kindling for the fire. But this is a story about an old man and an old woman that lived on the edge of a wood in a very, very run-down cottage. And when the wind blew, it just blew under the door and rattled the windows. And when it rained through the roof, and they had to put out saucepans and buckets to catch the drips of rain. Well, like it's been like the last few days, the wind blew through the woods. And when it had calmed down a bit, the old man and the old woman did what they often did. They took a couple of bags and they went off into the woods to collect sticks. 1 stick, 2 stick, 3 stick. Help me, help me, help me, help me. And the old man looked at the woman and said, "Lass, did you see something?" "No, Bill, it wasn't me, no, no." And they carried on collecting sticks. 1 stick, 2 stick, 3 stick. "Help me, help me, help me, help me." And the old woman turned to the old man and said, "Bill, did you see something?" "No, lass, it wasn't me, no, no, no." And they carried on collecting sticks. And the reason they were collecting sticks was that they would collect them in bags and they would take them to the market. And so they could still sell them for kindling and get a little bit of money so they could buy some food and anything else they needed. They carried on collecting sticks. 1 stick, 2 stick, 3 stick. "Help me, help me, help me, help me." And they looked at one another and said, "Well, it must be something else, somebody else." And they looked down there and they saw a fairy, a little fairy that was trapped under a small trunk of a tree. And the small trunk of the tree was enough to trap the fairy, but the old man, the woman, it was easy to lift it up over them, and they went over and they picked up this log, this branch of a tree, and released the fairy. And the fairy was so pleased that the fairy said, "Now I will grant you 3 wishes." And with that was gone, disappeared. Well, the old man and the old woman, they thought, wow, this is great. I mean, 3 wishes. And they discussed this as they went home to the cottage, and they went in to the cottage, and the old man just went back into the back to find the pump and to have a wash. And the old woman went into the kitchen, and she opened the cupboard door, and there's nothing but a mouldy old tea bag or two and a bit of rancid cheese. And she said, "I wish there was a whole frying pan full of Lincolnshire sausage on the stove." And bang, there it was. And the old man came out and said, "What's this? What's this?" And the old woman said, "Well, I wish there's some sausage in the frying pan on the stove." The old man said, "You twit. We could have wished for anything. We could have wished for silver and gold that had lasted us for years. We could have wished for a new cottage. We could ask for a whole cartload of sausages. I wish these sausages were stuck on the end of your nose." Ding! And there they were, the old woman with a whole string of sausages stuck on the end of her nose. And she tried to pull them off, and he tried to pull. Oh, shit! Oh, down, that hurts. Down. And he tried to get a knife and cut them off, but they were magic sausages, and he couldn't cut them off. He couldn't release his wife from these sausages stuck at the end of her nose. Now, that old man loved his wife very much, and he knew what to do, because he only had one wish left. And he said, "I wish that those Lincolnshire sausages were back in the frying pan on the stove top." Oh, and there they were. And so the old man and the old woman had a lovely supper that night of fried Lincolnshire sausages. And they learned a very important lesson. Be careful what you wish for, because sometimes wishes come true.
Right. Well, I think, thanks, Keith. That's lovely. Thank you very much, mate. Now, we've been going an hour. Unless anybody wants to tell another story, everybody who wants to tell a story has told one. So we can either finish or we can have a chat about stories. Or there's one thing I would like to say to you, Dispinia. When you're telling stories in a different language, you have to be really, really careful if you use, they're sometimes called hit words. Now, they use a word to attract everybody's attention. Sometimes they're called swear words, right? Now, if you're going to use a swear word in a different language, you have to really make sure that you know how powerful it is, right? Now, the one that you used earlier in English, that's okay. It was an adult audience and that was fine. You haven't done anything wrong. I'm not trying to say that. But what you have to do is to be really, really careful. If you use swear words or hit words in your own language, you know exactly the power of that word and what you're trying to say. If you're using in different languages, you don't know how powerful they are sometimes, or not powerful, as the case may be. And so I never swear in a story, or sometimes I use hit words in schools because I want to wake the kids up and I want to make sure that they're listening. And I do it on purpose, and you can see them going like this. But I know exactly what I'm doing because it's my language. If you're in a second, third or fourth, and I know you're a far better linguist than I am. I struggle with 2.5 languages, and I think you speak about 7 or something. I know this. But just be ever so careful when you use a hit word or swear word. Okay? Yeah. All right. And like I said, you haven't done anything wrong tonight. Absolutely not. Okay? Okay. Right, Kath, you had to get away 7:05 anyway. So where are you off to?
I've got a bit of work to do, Mike, actually, and I want to eat my tea, but I've got a bit of work tonight that I want to get done tonight.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Right, okay. Well, I'm going to call it tonight, I think. We'll have
Hope you get something better than a slice of toast tonight, Kath.
Oh,
the door.
Yeah. Well, it's a veggie burger actually, so it might be flat enough to go under the door.
Yeah,
that's good.
You get some Lincolns and sausages. We'll send you some over. Okay. Well, I've been here all day, so I might just slip out for pint of beer. You never know. I'll see what things up to. So, Keith, it's always a pleasure to be in your company again. Have you got your tractor going over the winter, or is it all trucked up?
It's in the shed. I must actually strike it up to make sure it'll still go, but I keep meaning to try strike up every sort of a month or so, but I never get around to it. But I must strike it up, make sure it goes. It's petrol paraffin, so I've got to make sure I look after it.
Yeah, no, mine's the same. And I haven't done mine since Christmas, and that's 6 weeks, isn't it? So I got mine going over
Good night,
Christmas.
Donna.
Yeah. See ya.
Right, thank you.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, see you. Right. Yeah, so we're talking about vintage tractors, Despona. They were made in 1947.
Oh,
we both got one. And it's the same technology as the Spitfires and the bombers in the wars and everything else. When they finished the wars, they started making tractors. And so I can't afford a Spitfire or a Lancaster bomber, but I could afford not very many hundreds of. I don't know how much you paid for yours, Keith, but mine was some hundreds of pounds.
Well, I inherited mine from my dad. It was new when he bought it in the 1940s. So when it was
first, right.
Yeah, when it was first out. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
There you go. All right. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it's called an aviation cab because the bits that were left over from the Spitfire, they made that cab. It's quite an unusual cab, actually.
I am so envious. It's unbelievable that you've got that cab. I really have. And I must put my hand up, Keith, and I think you're going to understand this when I say it. I think Kath is going to, I think she knows anyway, but she's just going to way ahead, sadly. I went and bought a boat. That's about the stupidest thing you can do is to buy a boat.
And a minigun.
Nah, I disagree, Mike. We have one. We love it.
Well, yeah, Susan, right. You might as well dig a hole and chuck money in it. That's what I mean.
Okay. Yeah. No, it is an expensive thing to have, but it's so much fun on the water. So
Yeah, well, this is, well, my surname is Rust, and so when we have a boat, it's always called the Rusty something, and I think we're up to the Rusty 7. over the years.
Okay.
But a couple of them were very big canoes that we had for the rivers in England here, where you could put the kids in and things.
I was 1 point shorter than you.
Right, and our boats are river boats and canal boats and things like that. They're not, and GP14s, they're not. So if they've got waves and tides, we don't understand it where we live. Okay.
Yeah.
But I do know every pub from Stratford on Avon down to Tewkesbury on the River Avon, and there's one called the Frog and Bulrush, and that's the name of the pub by an old medieval river bridge over the River Avon at Bideford. And it's been there because when in the old days, when the stonemasons turned up to build a stone bridge over the river, how many? Right, this is about 1260 or 1120 or something. Every builder I know, when he finishes work, he goes to the pub and has a couple of pints on the way home. And so they get to the river and they go, "We're not building your bridge until we built your pub." So they built the pub first, and then they built the bridge. So the pub's been there that long. Okay.
Oh wow! Yeah, wonderful. Mike, our boat is called Bob because it bobs up and down. So
right, we're going to have to explain that to Dispinia. Right, bobbing up and down on the river is when it goes like this. Okay. Is it a sea boat or a river boat?
No, we're on the Val Dam, so it's a inland dam. Was made about 40 years ago, and it's quite a large bit of water and lovely for sailing.
So it's a wooden sailing boat.
It's a Holiday 23.
Right, okay.
Yeah, fiberglass, yes.
Fiberglass, right? Okay, right. Well, if you're ever over in the UK, Sue, make sure I get to know, and I'll take you out on mine on the River Avon. And it's the River Avon that goes from Stratford on Avon down through to Tewkesbury, and it's Evesham and Pershore are the other towns you're looking for. It's that one. The Avon in the Old English means river, so there's 5 or 6 different. River Avon means river. Okay.
Yeah. So, Mike, a question. Why on earth do you name a storm Eunice? When you that's looking for trouble.
Right. So they are named in alphabetical order every year. So you have A, B, C, D, E, F. We've just had Eunice was a couple of days ago. Franklin is about here now.
Yeah.
We've got Storm Franklin. The next one will be like Storm Georgina. They're named somewhere in a cave in the middle of Somerset.
Oh,
I think that's where they're named, and it's got to be for the British and Irish Isles as well. So each storm is done for the lot. So that's the only answer I can give you. Okay.
Well, it seems pretty rough, eh? It's conditions are really bad.
We only have red warnings out, which is the way we use it now. That means there's potential deaths are going to happen. So, and we lost 4 people in the 2 red areas for the last couple of days, where people were killed directly by the storms. That means trees falling on top of people and cars crashing and things like that. Okay, so don't take your boat out. All right. Yeah, mine's in the shed at the moment. So. Right, I'm going to call it then. So, Ali, if you're listening, I'm not sure you are, but I'm going to go. So I'll see everybody in a fortnight.
Yeah.
Okay. And we'll start talking. We'll all start talking and saving up about going to Marrakesh next year. Okay.
Okay. Bye.
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 Oh.
We was expecting people to be here.
I don't think they're back.
No, no.
Thank you, Mike.